It began as a subtle presence, a flicker at the edge of vision, like a shadow moving just beyond the reach of light. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the mind, the kind of fleeting illusion that often accompanies late nights spent in solitude. But as days turned into weeks, the presence grew more distinct, more tangible, until it became impossible to ignore. He lived alone in a small, dimly lit apartment, the kind of place where shadows seemed to gather in corners and linger in the stillness of the night. The hours after sunset were his sanctuary, a time when the world outside receded, and he could retreat into the quiet confines of his mind. But recently, the night had taken on a different quality, something sinister, something watchful. It started with the feeling of being observed, an inexplicable sense that eyes were upon him even when he was alone. He would glance up from his book or the flickering television screen, only to find the room empty, the darkness undisturbed. Yet the sensation persisted, growing stronger with each passing night, until it became a constant companion. He began to notice signs, small, almost imperceptible details that hinted at the presence of something else. The rustle of fabric when no one was there, the faint sound of footsteps that ceased the moment he strained to listen, the feeling of a cold draft brushing against his skin in a room with no open windows. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of an unseen gaze. His sleep became fitful, plagued by dreams that he could not remember, but left him with a lingering sense of dread. He would wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that something was in the room with him. But no matter how quickly he turned on the light, he was always alone. It was during one of these restless nights that he first caught a glimpse of it, the cat. It was a fleeting moment, a blur of movement at the periphery of his vision as he lay in bed, staring into the darkness. He sat up, eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing there. Yet the impression of the cat remained, etched into his mind like a half-remembered dream. As the days wore on, the cat began to make itself known more frequently. It was always the same, an indistinct form, black as the night itself, slipping silently through the shadows. It never approached, never made a sound, but he could feel its presence as surely as if it were right beside him. The cat was watching him, observing his every move with a cold, calculating intelligence. He tried to dismiss it as a figment of his imagination, a byproduct of his isolation and the long hours spent in the gloom of his apartment. But the cat persisted, always lurking just out of reach. Its eyes, though he never saw them, boring into him with a malevolence that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't long before the cat began to invade his waking life. He would see it in the corner of his eye while walking down the street, a shadow slipping into an alleyway just as he turned his head. He would catch a glimpse of it in the reflection of a shop window, only for it to vanish the moment he focused on it. The cat was everywhere and nowhere, an ever-present phantom that stalked him relentlessly. His nights became unbearable. The cat would sit at the foot of his bed, a dark silhouette against the pale light of the moon. He could feel its eyes on him, watching, waiting. He tried to ignore it, tried to force himself to sleep, but the weight of its gaze kept him awake, his mind racing with thoughts he could not quiet. The cat grew bolder. It began to appear closer, no longer content to remain at the edges of his vision. He would find it sitting in the hallway, blocking his path as he made his way to the kitchen for a glass of water. He would see it perched on the windowsill, its outline barely discernible against the night sky. The cat was no longer just a shadow, it was a presence, a living, breathing creature that had taken root in his life. He became obsessed, driven to the brink of madness by the cat's constant surveillance. He searched the apartment for any sign of how it was entering, but found nothing. There were no open windows, no broken locks, no gaps in the walls where it could slip through. The cat seemed to defy logic, appearing and disappearing at will, always just out of reach. His thoughts turned darker. What did the cat want? Why was it watching him? Was it a mere animal or something more? A harbinger, a messenger from the other side? The questions gnawed at him, feeding his growing paranoia. He began to feel trapped, his own home transformed into a cage where the cat held dominion. Then came the night when he could no longer stand it. The cat was there, as always, sitting at the foot of his bed, its eyes, glowing now, like twin embers, fixed on him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. He could feel its gaze piercing through him, probing the depths of his soul. In a fit of desperation, he lunged at the cat, his hands grasping for its slender form. But the moment he moved, the cat was gone, slipping into the shadows like a wisp of smoke. He stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward until he crashed to the floor. The pain was sharp, but it did nothing to quell the rising tide of terror that surged through him. He scrambled to his feet, eyes wild, searching the room for any sign of the cat. But it was gone, vanished into the night. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. The apartment was silent, the only sound the frantic beating of his own pulse. But then he heard it, the faintest of sounds, a whisper of movement in the darkness. He turned slowly, dread pooling in his stomach as he realized where the sound was coming from. There in the mirror was the cat. It sat on the other side of the glass, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But what froze him in place was not the cat's presence. It was the reflection of his own face, distorted and twisted, staring back at him with the same malevolent intelligence that shone in the cat's eyes. His breath caught in his throat as the realization dawned. The cat had not been stalking him, it had been leading him, guiding him to this moment, to this revelation. The cat was a reflection of something deeper, something buried within him, a darkness he had refused to acknowledge. As he stared into the mirror, the cat's image began to blur, melding with his own until there was no distinction between the two. The reflection smiled, a cold, cruel smile that did not reach his eyes, and in that moment he understood. The cat was not an intruder. It was a part of him, a manifestation of the fear, the paranoia, the darkness that had festered within him for so long. The cat was him. And as the mirror cracked, splintering into a web of fractures, he realized with dawning horror that there was no escape. The cat had been watching him all along, from within, waiting for the moment when he would finally see the truth. But the question remained. Now that he had seen it, could he ever look away?